But when I was asked to do this panel, we talked about the art of visibility. I was thinking, well, what does visibility mean in the context of stimulating new perspectives about the value of diversity, which is a mission at New Art Exchange, where I'm based in Nottingham. And of course, I suppose this panel is the activism panel that's challenging the kind of status quo or perception within society that enables inequality to continue. So this is about work that counters that, encounters it and counters it. And it is visibility from the point of being seen and heard, and profiling artists and those perspectives that then bring the change that we're looking to see. And I had the unfortunate experience recently of losing an artist friend in the Grenfell Tower, and it reminded me about the uncertainty and divide and the tale of two cities, as David Lammy MP put it the other day, in our cities, and that the situation can't be resolved just through art and culture, but it can play a massive role at the heart of this holistic change. And I suppose when we think about the digital age, certainly it's a tool for accelerating change, but does the digital age also inform the content, the structure, and the form of art? And I think we're going to hear a bit of that in this panel. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel to you. Starting to the furthest of my right is Tanya Rob Webber, is an acclaimed disabled artist challenging the notion of identity within contemporary portraiture, and often creating portraits of high-profile disabled people during live sittings in high-profile public art galleries and venues. She's won so many awards, so here they are. The Ability Media International Award, Visual Arts in 2010, and Dada International Festival, Visual Arts Award 2008. She has appeared on BBC programme The Culture Show and undertaking a live televised portrait of the actor, musician and performance artist Matt Fraser, and recently shortlisted for the National Diversity Awards Lifetime Achievement. Her recent project, her recent collection, the project Portraits Untold, is a very ambitious and unique project, exploring and celebrating the diversity of our common humanity through a series of 4 live portrait sittings with high-profile sitters. So there's a total of 4 of them, and this has taken place and included Dame Evelyn Glennie at the National Portrait Gallery, John Akamfra at BMAG in Birmingham, Neil Baldwin at Stoke City FA, and David Hoyle at Bynborough Hall. And I think I'll move on. There's a lot more there. You can read it. To my thank you, Tanya. And then to my right, immediate right here, is Yasmeen Baig Clifford, who's a producer and curator from Birmingham. And in 2012, she founded Vivid Projects. It's a collaborative organization using media arts to encourage innovation and experimentation in artistic practice. Her commitment to interdisciplinary programming delivers digital, performative, and moving image activities for ambitious public programs. In 2014, she initiated Black Hole Club, a program advocating for convergence and supporting creatives with new thinking about the production, distribution, and consumption of digital practice and relationship to it. To my left, I have Kate Dangerfield, and is collaborating with John Finn. I'll just explain who Kate is first, and hopefully you've read this as well, but I'll just repeat it so you get a sense of Kate. Kate Dangerfield developed her interest in media accessibility and filmmaking while studying for her MA in accessible filmmaking at the University of Roehampton in 2013-14, not 19. It was an opportunity to develop her passion for filmmaking, but with a new perspective that focuses on accessibility and promotes access for all. Kate's interests has grown in this area, and she's now studying for her PhD in accessible filmmaking. She's currently working in collaboration with Sense UK, the leading charity campaigner for people who are to some extent both deaf and blind, and her research is being funded by the Vice Chancellor's Scholarship and the British Film Institute. John Finn, to the furthest left here, is a determined self-starter, entrepreneur and creative. He is a visionary storyteller. He has clear vision for inclusive films and animation and focuses on creating work with both deaf and hearing audiences, with adults and children. He's born deaf and recently becomes registered blind. Finn has strong communication skills and is able to inspire people to work with him to meet his goals. Finn has sound understanding of how the lack of programs, those that are accessible to deaf people and mainly deaf children, can impede the progress, and is keen to change this. So there's a real sense of urgency and activism in John's work. So without carrying on with the biogs, I'm going to hand it over to Kate, who will then work with John to talk about their work.
Thank you. I think I'll stand up here to do the presentation, and then we're going to hand over to John. Should I come around the front? Thank you. Is this one? Yeah. Yes. You want to use that? Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So, thank you very much. Finn and I are going to talk about the art of visibility in the context of the work that we're currently doing on the Accessible Film Project. The initial idea for the project was to produce films with people with sensory impairments and other complex needs. So, is that right? Yeah, sorry. So we could develop practices to empower people to use filmmaking as a viable tool for communication, creativity, and expression, but also so we could establish the best way to provide access. The project is the practice element of my PhD on accessible filmmaking at the University of Roehampton, and it has been developed in collaboration with Sense UK, the leading deaf-blind charity, and it's also funded by the BFI Diversity Fund. Finn is an award-winning filmmaker and animator, although actually we already have been introduced, but I'll just go through it again quickly. And he's been working with us on the project as a workshop facilitator and a mentor during one of the courses of filmmaking workshops that we've done at the Sense Resource Centre Summit Point in Birmingham. So today, Finn is going to talk about his practice, but he's going to focus on his involvement in the project and how the participant that he's been working with has shared his story through film. But before he does, I want to give an overview of the project through highlighting the challenges and considerations that have arisen in terms of accessibility. And so in order for the participants to be involved throughout the filmmaking process and for their cultural voices to be made visible to as wide an audience as possible. So firstly, I would like to talk about what we mean by accessibility. The term is widely used in a range of contexts, in referring to a lot of people with a lot of different needs. And to mention a few, that could be audience development or tourism management and services, new media technologies. These areas, are interrelated, and the overarching aim is to improve access in a very broad sense. But despite the similarities, we feel that it's really important not to conflate these areas to ensure that we really deal with the challenges and issues that accessibility presents. So in relation to the Accessible Film Project, we've identified 3 key areas, which is access to creation, and this includes access to opportunities, access to equipment and software, and of course, access to funding. The second is access to content, which primarily we mean access to film. Some people would prefer subtitles for the deaf of hard of hearing, for instance, or sign language, whereas blind or visually impaired people may prefer audio description. However, other than film, it also relates to other things, so access to scripts and storyboards and learning resources. And finally, access to space. And so here we're talking about access to venues. We're going to focus on access to creation today, as this is particularly relevant to the discussion. And I'm going to talk about it broadly, and then Finn is going to talk about his involvement in the project. So, access to creation. So Sense identified that the people they support were interested in filmmaking, but the opportunities were not available. So for the project, initially we held 10 filmmaking workshops with people with sensory impairments and other complex needs at 3 Sense Resource Centres in the UK. So at Summit Point in Birmingham, at Cambridge Resource Centre, and at Touch Base South East in Barnet. So the workshops were an opportunity for people to explore and experiment with film. Each course of workshops had the same starting point, but as they were participant-led, each course of workshops developed in a very different way. So here in Birmingham, this is Wilf, and the photo shows Wilf, and he's positioning his Playmobil car, and he's doing a stop motion at the moment. Wilf has been collecting Playmobil since 2011. He's got this huge collection of different, he's got a hospital and a police station and so many different, like huge boxes of it. So, and he was really interested in doing a stop motion with these. And then in Cambridge, the students chose to film their daily experiences. And here the photo shows one of the students was wearing a GoPro during a session where they were using a parachute. So we had some really beautiful footage of this activity. And in Barnet, participants chose to film their senses, focusing on touch, taste and smell. And here is a photo of the workshop. Okay, so, and another part of access to creation, we were thinking about equipment and software. So the workshops were an opportunity for participants to experiment with equipment to identify which equipment was accessible. For some participants, they were happy to use camcorders and iPads and a GoPro. The camcorder was really good for some people with visual impairments because they could hold the camera really close to their face and they were using the viewfinder like that, whereas an iPad, some of the larger scale iPads were great for some people with visual impairments because they had the bigger screen and with the light as well, so this was something that was really useful. And also with the GoPro, for instance, it was really good because you can get harnesses, as I'm sure you know, for GoPros. So there was a participant who's blind and she uses her hands quite a lot to move around. So actually the GoPro was perfect for her because she could move around freely. But for some of the participants, the equipment wasn't really suitable. So here we used a haptic vest, which you can see in the picture, and it transfers low frequencies to your body through a vest. We could connect this to a sound recorder, so the mic would pick up frequencies and people could still record sound, but in a different way. And you could also link this to the camcorder as well. And then here as well, this was really interesting and worked really well, that we weren't expecting to work as well as it did, were camcorder glasses. So the camera is in the bridge of the glasses. And again, as I was saying about some people that rely on using their hands to get around, the glasses were really, really useful for this. Actually, we'll go back to that because I'm only just going to focus on access to creation. And the final thing in terms of access to creation is funding. Because of the number of workshops and the equipment, that was one of the major challenges that we needed to find funding. So I'm going to pass over to Finn, and he's going to talk about his involvement in the project. And he was working with Wilf, who you saw in the first picture for Birmingham. Thank you.
We started when he was young, and I started filmmaking when I was very young. My parents were farmers, so they didn't have many skills in this environment. They were looking after sheep and cows, and that was really too much for me to take on as a career. my mind was absolutely exploding with creativity. The farm, you know, it was okay, but I really wanted to become an artist. It wasn't easy for me because, as an artist, I did know that at some point I was going to go blind, and I was already deaf. So as a deaf-blind artist, that was going to be a challenge. But I was so determined to carry on as an artist. I thought possibly I could become an accountant, but I did the exams. It was so boring. I failed, you know, a few times. And I thought, really, I need to carry on with accountancy, but I just didn't want to. So then I decided to go to art school. I really enjoyed art school. I was absolutely itching for new experiences, and the art was so lovely. It was such a bubbly environment. So I went to London and joined the film school. I started to produce different pieces of work, but I thought, you know, how am I going to pay for this? My father was quite wealthy, he had a lot of land to sell, so he said he would do that and pay for my art school because, and that got me through art school. My dad selling part of the land. At the same time, different technologies were starting to become digital. I started to use film. I was using old mechanisms for filming. Everything started to then change to digital. So I kind of took a step back at that point. At the same time I was going through art school, I was trying to develop my filmmaking skills. Different people, you know, were saying, maybe you should get a white-collar job, you know, maybe you should give this up, you know, maybe this isn't for you. Focus on something that you can do, you can achieve. You know, art isn't going to be for you. Then I went into animation. I went up north, and I started to do my MA in animation. I started to do my final thesis, and I thought I would do my final thesis in motion capture. A lot of people looked down on me, you know, but I thought I was determined. I was going to do motion capture. They thought, you know, you can't do that as someone who's signed, someone who uses BSL. But it was before, really, there was a lot of authoritative information on this. I was probably one of the first to have this kind of idea, to do this with motion capture, and I wanted to do this. I was determined to carry on with this fight. But, you know, people thought this isn't something you can do as a disabled person. So I decided to set up my own company in motion capture. And then I started to do capture with sign language. Then I was going to do one of the films to incorporate motion capture with British Sign Language. And I thought, it's really interesting. I came across this book, The Hungry Caterpillar, that had been used. They used motion capture signing. A lot of their funding had fallen through. The ideas for me since that time hadn't really come off. And then I discovered this book. I had a baby, she was deaf, and I realised, you know, there's an opportunity here. My baby was also going to become registered blind at some point in the future. So then I thought I would contact Sense and try and do something so I could improve the quality of life for my daughter, who would also become blind like me. I asked Sense, what can I do for my daughter, you know, because I want to improve her life at school. I really want to help her. I don't want her to have the idea she can't do it, she's going to become blind like me, and she's also deaf. You know, my daughter can be a bit of a pain in the arse, I will admit, but I wanted her to be confident, and I wanted her to have the can-do attitude. And this was going through the back of my mind. I wanted my daughter to have the confidence that I had. So I thought, really, I need to roll up my sleeves and do something for blind children. So I said to Sense, can I do anything? And that's when they introduced me to Kate Dangerfield. I said, is there any way I can help and be involved? And that's how I got introduced then to Wilf. I didn't know with Wilf that he is deafblind, that's right. Also, he has an extra disability that I didn't realise he's also autistic. So I thought, I was trying to encourage him to create a storyboard as part of the process, because I wanted to encourage him, you can do this, don't let your disability stop you. And I was thinking with him, how can he create a storyboard? But really, he was having all of these ideas. I wanted him to have the view that he can do anything. The world is open for him. And also, because of his contact with Kate and the project, I wanted him to really use this. I wanted him to be inspired by this. So then, I really wanted to open up his mind, which was very closed, really, as a deaf-blind person, so that he can really achieve things using motion capture. And that's really the experience.
Thank you. Thank you, John. That was a really very fascinating, and Kate, for that. The Accessible Film Project. Check it out on the web. Hope you're tweeting about it. And this can-do attitude and shifting into a better quality of life through digital tools has provided a liberating moment for both John and Kate, and the work they're doing in the communities with young people and students. So let me introduce now, well, I've already introduced Yasmeen. Yasmeen, why don't you tell us about your projects at Vivid Projects?
Okay. So I'm going to give you a piece of audio to listen to in a moment. It's about 4 minutes long, so you'll need to concentrate. But because we're thinking about visibility and bringing other voices into a conversation and considering how we might do that with digital tools, we're focusing on a project that we've recently completed at Vivid with a curator called Ian Sargent. And essentially, the project has been about reviving technology and taking people on a journey of the ways in which technology becomes obsolete. And if technology becomes obsolete, the work that it was used to create can become lost to us. And a couple of years ago, Ian came along and said he'd found 2 pieces of work by the artist Donald Rodney, who was born in Smethwick, was a member of the Radical Black Arts Group in the 1980s, formed at Nottingham Trent University. And do you know what? He'd never had a solo show in Birmingham since he'd become a well-known artist. He died in 1998. Donald suffered from sickle cell anemia, hence his early death. And what I wasn't particularly aware of, I only had the slightest awareness of this, was that literally on the day he died, a project had landed on the Arts Council of England's desk for a new fund they'd come up with, the New Media Project Fund, which was there they'd recognised that artists were starting to use new media tools, and they decided to dedicate a fund to try and, I guess, put a more considered focus on this sort of practice. And Donald Rodney and his collaborator Mike Phillips, who was working with a coding group at the University of Plymouth, had been devising an idea around the auto icon, the notion of the auto icon, and creating a repository for Donald Rodney as an artist, as a thinker, as a creative, in quite a playful sense to begin with. They weren't to know that as the project went in that Donald would die. He knew he was very unwell, he was very fragile, but the project went ahead without him. And that's what really gripped me, because it was one of the earliest examples I'd seen of a project that was created by a group of collaborators without the originating authorial voice. So it started to, I think, correspond with work that we are looking at now, which considers authenticity, co-authorship, orphan work. How do we make this work sort of real and vital? How do we carry on having a relationship to it? And prior to that, Donald had completed one further work, which was an autonomous wheelchair called Psalm. He was already thinking about the fact he may be absent in the very near future. And again, this was a sculpture, essentially, made from a modified wheelchair that was identical to the one that Donald had been using for the previous decade. But Donald was hospitalised to such an extent and so frequently that he not only had to give directions on completing his paintings and drawings and prints by telephone to his partner, but again, he authored the movements on paper of the autonomous wheelchair, and there were an amazing group of collaborators that made it viable, from British Aerospace, technologists, a whole group of fantastic MA and undergraduate researchers, again at the University of Plymouth, and I think which really starts to flag up how amazingly important university research is to this sort of practice. What we're going to play is a series of excerpts of audio featuring Donald Rodney's niece and his mother, who's 98, Professor Mike Phillips, his final collaborator, Marlene Smith, who was a fellow member of the Black Art Group, and Ian Sargent, who is the curator who initiated the project about Donald. And I think it'll throw up some points. So I think we culminated this project at the end with some of the extracts you hear there, with the symposium, University of Birmingham, where we looked at how you start to have conversations through outmoded technology, this cutting-edge technology that attracted, kind of key funding and technologists back in 97 to 98, was effectively Windows 98 combined with what is now the Roomba. Has anyone seen the little robotic vacuum cleaners? The Raabe, is it the Raabe, the Roomba? Roomba. So the SARMs, the wheelchair, can involve people who went on to become the co-designers of that piece of technology, which I think Donna would have found hilarious. It's been amusing. And I think for us as a start, it's a starting point for considering not only how many different sorts of groups of people were working through from the early 90s to maybe as little as a decade ago on incredibly important critical practice that I think the majority of the public and people who are working across visual arts now just aren't aware of, because it's kind of bracketed as technology, early technology-driven work, perhaps is sitting in terms of historical design, etc. So wouldn't necessarily be fully considered as part of critical arts practice. So we, broadly as a group of curators of Vivid Projects, we're very interested in how we work on rethinking some of that practice and finding correspondences with activity now. And one of the most interesting outcomes for us has been how what we'd consider fairly lo-fi distribution, i.e. patterns of social media, have made that work, just those two pieces of work, Auto Icon and SARM, accessible to a whole new group of people, including curators, including, as we heard in that clip, that's a Radio 4 programme that's going to be on next week, who they knew nothing about Donald Rodney. They were looking to make a programme possibly about black art, as they described it to us, and said, "Oh, what's this we hear you're working on?" And we, at that point, we were looking at a 20-year-old CD-ROM called Auto Icon, which we might talk about, the implications of that kind of work later. So, for me, that was great. Digital reach, really consisting of tweets and a few references on our website. We're a tiny arts organisation in the centre of Birmingham, results in a major broadcaster dedicating half an hour to an artist that people weren't really taking very much notice of until recently. So we're thrilled with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Yasmeen. So thank you, Yasmeen. That was a really very interesting insight into the revival of an artist who dies early in his life, I guess, with sickle cell, and it's reviving sort of kind of the foundations of old technologies, or foundations that lead to practice today, but have missed a whole generation of critical analysis. But also coming from the kind of black radical arts perspective as well, and now reviving and repositioning that in the work you're doing. Okay, so Tanya, I guess this is over to you. You've got a special arrangement with your microphone, so I'll let you crack on.
Madonna, from the Madonna mic. Originated from the Portraits Untold project. So I'm going to play a video, which is a culmination of slides and videos directly taken from the full four portrait sittings that I've done that you mentioned earlier, and kind of one of the reasons why I kind of created this project was really to sort of like bring together a culmination of all the different ways that I've been practicing art and making paintings over the last 25, 30 years, really. And I kind of specialise in creating portraits and images of disabled people from the disability arts movement. So I'm kind of classed as a really sort of like, disability activist, really. But a kind of in a quiet, revolutionary way, really. So the portrait's untold. So there was a lot of elements to kind of pull together within this, but kind of looking at really, I'm trying to look at fusing digital art practice along with traditional paint, and how I do that is through I kind of discovered the iPad. Not that I discovered, but I discovered the small iPad was great and everything, because I started with the kind of touch, and I like that because it's painting for me is very, it's a tactile thing. I work with canvases and brushes and paints, so it's very it's very dimensional. There's sound to it. There's a tactile to it, and then but then I kind of came to the iPad Pro and the iPad Pencil, and this kind of has revolutionised my digital drawing practice, because the iPencil gives me kind of a fluidity. I don't have to push or lean, or all I have to do is touch it really gently, and it creates a mark. But it also creates a mark in the same way that when I push a paintbrush on a canvas, it creates a mark which is, I can make it thin, I can make it thick, I can make it heavy, I can make it light. So, and then there was another element to the Portraits Untold, was that I wanted to bring my portraiture out of the studio, which is kind of this kind of lockdown, isolated space where it's just me and the canvas and usually photographs. I wanted to open the idea of this watching a portrait being made in front of your eyes, which is kind of like it's such a magical, kind of seductive thing. And I wanted to also embrace the audience in this. I wanted the audience to join me in the drawing of the portrait sitter, and I've chosen sitters in this collection who are not necessarily disabled, but people who are from a diverse background, people who I feel that I can connect with in terms of a cultural identity and a kind of a sense of activism within that work. So should we just should we play the video? And I can talk through the video as well. It's got like a nice little... In fact, Fez put it together, who's doing the live stream out the back. So this is John Aconfra in the portrait, in Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, and we have a conversation whilst I'm doing the painting, and we talked a lot around the missing identity of our own cultural identities within museum and art gallery collections. And you see there, I've got the iPad there. And I'm beginning to... People have done some drawings, and they're being brought into the iPad, and then I'm projecting them onto the painting, and then essentially it's not tracing, because it's it's really a sense of interpreting other people's visual language as well as my own. And each one of these sittings covers a whole day, and we're talking like 7 hours. So it's, it's also a feat of endurance. For me, particularly, because this is Evelyn Glennie in the National Portrait Gallery. Now, I met with Evelyn Glennie several times, and we kind of found this unique way of kind of creating a portrait with her making sounds and then me sort of like painting her portrait, which respond to that sound. And we kind of ended up discovering this shared experience of her painting the canvas with sound and me painting the canvas with physical paint. But then a little bit later, we kind of also, this was kind of like a unique thing where she was playing and then I was kind of digitally painting her sound and her music while looking at her, responding to that. And here we are with, so she feels the sound of through the canvas, and I keep looking up at her because I want to interpret what she looks like, but in an abstract way, of course. And then you see all the other drawings. They're kind of like images that the public, they've either drawn it on pencil and paper and then digitally, then we've digitised them. I mean, it's kind of, where does that kind of, where does that fusion of the digital paint and the real paint, come together? Where does it really fuse? That's kind of what I'm trying to discover in my mind and in the practice. And also, it's about creating a portrait. It's bringing the portraiture into a performative space. I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. This is Neil Baldwin. Neil Baldwin has came to fame through his philosophy of being happy. This took place in Stoke City Football Club because Neil is a big football fan and actually became the kit man of the football club. Neil has a learning disability, but in Neil's world, Neil doesn't have a learning disability. Neil is Neil. So again, we're having this great conversation. Oh, look, there's Jackie, my lovely assistant down here. We're looking at circus comics because Neil ran away to the circus to join the circus, and in fact, my parents met in the circus, and the circus is a very important aspect of disability art and disability culture. So here he is putting this, and I couldn't decide whether to finish the painting with the wig on or the wig off. Again, there's an audience on the other side, and again they're kind of asking us questions, and then the whole thing is live streamed as well. So we had regular visitors coming in from Ireland, Australia, and I think America, various other places. We built up a following. Again, it's a kind of people at home were doing their drawings and then sending them in. We were embedding those drawings. We have Cameron here, who's from a learning disability project called Projectability in Glasgow, who joined us with another couple of artists. I had an outfit for each one. This one, I had birds, because again, Neil kind of, he has a collection of budgies. Budgies, he loves budgies. And he used to draw. He draws budgies as well. It's Cameron drawing. So it's kind of you know. I've got to move on. Okay, move on. Okay, so well, you can watch the whole thing. The next one's David Hoyle in Benningborough Hall, so you can watch it. It's on the Portraits Untold website. David made me up. It was so funny. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tanya. What a very interesting project. And interesting that, so we'll go into Q&A with the audience in a minute, so do have your questions ready. But just an opener, really. I'll start with you, Tanya, actually, because that's very interesting, the whole idea of sort of live streaming and getting responses from audiences and the interaction between sitter, artist and audience, and to make it a live performative experience. What were the kind of, how did you respond to the kind of digital communications with audiences from across the world, and how was that interface working with you as in terms of process?
Well, you know, if somebody sent a question or a drawing, then it would come up on we had a screen, which so everything was kind of coming in live, so we could see it, and so I addressed the person who sent the whatever it was directly by directly facing the camera. So it was like they were in the room there with us, and in fact that was the response that a lot of people who were watching it through the live stream felt, that they were actually part of the event itself. So, you know, so they had Portraits Untold drawing and painting in their own front room or their kitchen or wherever they were.
Right, brilliant. Are there any questions from the audience? Just hearing from the panelists, any sort of burning thoughts out there? We can pass a mic round in terms of what you've heard. There's one at the back in the blue shirt. You can take. There's a microphone here, and if you need to use this, you can use mine.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank everybody on the panel. That was absolutely fantastic and really inspiring. I've got a question that's sort of it's directed at Yasmeen, I think. And my question is, does this act of remembering and rehabilitating art change the art?
Oh, that's a good question. I like that one. Does it change? I think it can do, to an extent, because quite often you're dealing with a work that's either being rescued, or to some extent through the very act of curation is being partially interpreted. You know, it's all freshly interpreted. There's always a generation, you know, with the example I looked at today, there's a generational aspect as well. So, yes, there's also been discussion. I remember somebody in particular talking about the act almost of mourning. You have to try and get beyond that, which is probably more straightforward if you're looking at work sort of almost structurally, as well as coming at it from a sort of a subjective, more empathetic perspective. I'm personally as interested in the methodologies that sat behind those pieces of work, the mode that brought them into creation, the fact that they were actually made by a group of people that titled themselves Donald Rodney PLC, and it was tongue-in-cheek, but it's actually a realistic assessment in some ways of a body that needed to be set up in order to realise the artist's works. And in fact, they were set up when he was still alive. He approved of that. But yeah, you start to cross this line, don't you, from something that you can, you have the reference point when the artist is here and you're remaking or representing, rebuilding something that they've created. You have the perfect reference point. You just ask the artist. When you don't have the artist, you're dealing with the artist's estate. If the artist's estate hasn't been left with a clear set of instructions, then it's open to interpretation. You have to make mutual decisions. So I feel there's a mix of responses and possibilities with work that's been revived, let's say, and work that's been harnessed using more contemporary technologies. And of course, everything was a technology at some point. Probably to some extent has the aura of nostalgia attached to it too. So there's lots of complicated things going on as we apprehend these works, I think.
Thank you.
So we've got time for one more question, then we'll finish. And if we haven't, we'll finish. We have a question over here with Lara. Did you have a question? She can ask questions, why not? It's going to be a difficult one.
It's not going to be a difficult one. It's not going to be two questions disguised as one either. It was coming back to, I think, Yasmeen's point about, I think in the 1990s, technology-driven practice wasn't seen as critical practice. And I think, how does, this is across the panel really, the fact that one of the things I like about technology, whatever it is, whether it's VR, AR, whatever you want to talk about it, is it's democratized how artists from diverse backgrounds can create their own platforms. And it's taking away from that very traditional centralized method of production. So how important is it that actually we can now create work from by far more diverse artists to far more diverse audiences?
Okay, maybe Kate, answer that.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer that. For our project, it's been very important. I don't think we would have been able to do what we've done without it. The readily available equipment and being able to show things online. For us, it's been very important. I don't know if Finn would like to talk about his experience as well.
Really, the experience online, it really, for a deaf blind person, it really helps them to unlock their creativity. It means that you can unlock their mind, their thoughts and ideas, and you can get to see things from their perspective, and it might really be unexpected what comes out. For Kate's project to do this, it's like she's given people a key. My role was to help people use the key to unlock their own potential, to open up a real wide world of creativity. So that means the audience get to see creativity from their point of view. It's not up to us to fix people into a mould. We give them that key, we open the door for them and guide them through. So that means then you get to see the perspective of a disabled person. You unlock that person's mind and you get to see and think and feel things that that person does.
Thank you, Kate and John. Brilliant answer. So I think we'll conclude here. I mean, thank you to the panel. It's been a really good session. So thank you to Tanya, Yasmeen, Kate and John. Thank you.